The forest stretched endlessly, a sea of dark green under a sky bruised with the last hues of twilight. Trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying lightly in the cool breeze, whispering secrets to those who dared venture beneath their canopy. Miguel, a seasoned ranger, had walked this forest for over 20 years. He knew every trail, every bird call, every shift in the wind, but something about tonight felt wrong. The radio on his belt crackled with static, and for a moment, he thought he heard a faint voice buried in the distortion. Shrugging it off, he adjusted his jacket and kept walking, boots crunching softly on the gravel path. Routine patrols, he reminded himself. Yet something gnawed at him, an unease that had been building over the past few months, a feeling that the forest was no longer just a place he protected, but something he needed protection from. The incidents had started small, minor things: broken fences, animal tracks too large to belong to any known predator, distant howls at odd hours of the night. It was easy to dismiss them as stray wolves or poachers passing through. But then the sightings began. Miguel wasn't one to believe in local legends. At least, not until other rangers started talking in hushed tones like gossip shared at the edge of a nightmare. "There's something out there," they whispered. "It's not a wolf. It's not a bear. It's something else." Miguel had brushed it off at first, calling it imagination, exhaustion, until he saw the fear in their eyes. These were hardened rangers, men and women used to the isolation and harshness of the wild. But this was different. He hadn't seen it himself, not yet. But there were stories passed between night shifts and campfires, of a shadow that walked upright on two legs, yellow eyes that glowed in the dark, a beast somewhere between human and wolf. The new recruits called it the Dogman. Miguel didn't laugh like the others did. The forest was ancient, older than any of them could imagine, and ancient places sometimes held ancient things. His hand drifted to the knife on his belt, a habit more than a necessity. Whatever was out here, if it existed at all, wouldn't be frightened off by a blade. Still, he found comfort in the familiar weight of it. Ahead, the path forked, one branch leading deeper into the forest, the other looping back toward the ranger station. He paused, staring into the darker trail. For a second, he thought he saw something move between the trees, a shadow too tall to be a deer, too fluid to be a man. His breath hitched. He blinked, and it was gone. The radio crackled again, louder this time. "Miguel, you there?" It was Ana, his patrol partner, her voice tense but controlled. He pressed the button. "I'm here. What's up?" There was a beat of static, then it's back, the same place as before. Miguel's stomach dropped. He knew exactly where she meant. The northern edge of the forest, the spot where they had found the carcass of a deer, gutted but not eaten, its throat torn open as if by claws too large to belong to any known predator. He stood still, heart thudding heavily in his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt afraid. Something was waiting in the forest, and he had a sinking feeling that tonight would bring him closer to it than he ever wanted to be. Miguel keyed the radio again, his voice steady despite the chill running down his spine. "On my way." He turned toward the darker trail and started walking, the forest closing in around him like a living thing, breathing, watching. The wind stirred, carrying with it the faintest sound, a low, distant howl, almost mournful. Miguel shivered and pulled his jacket tighter, though it wasn't the cold that made him tremble. Whatever was out there had come back, and this time it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. Miguel's boots pounded against the earth as he took the northern path, guided by instinct and Anna's voice still buzzing in his ear. The forest around him seemed thicker now, as if the trees had drawn closer in the deepening dark, their branches twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The air felt colder, and the usual night sounds, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of insects, were conspicuously absent. Only silence accompanied him, heavy and unnatural, broken occasionally by the static pop of his radio. As he moved, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that he was being followed, though every time he turned, there was nothing but the dark corridor of trees behind him. It was the kind of silence that could drive a person mad, stretching between breaths, pressing on the nerves. Miguel clenched his jaw and kept going, focusing on the rhythm of his steps. Ahead, the trees thinned, and the undergrowth gave way to a clearing marked by a jagged rock outcrop, the spot where the deer carcass had been found weeks ago. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows, revealing Anna waiting near the far side of the clearing, her silhouette tense against the dim glow of the lantern she had planted in the ground. "Miguel, over here." Her voice was sharp, clipped. Not panic. Anna never panicked, but controlled fear. She waved him over, her hand resting lightly on the stock of her rifle. Miguel jogged to her side, breathing heavily. "What do we have?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Anna didn't answer right away. Instead, she nodded toward the far edge of the clearing where the trees formed a dense wall of shadow. Something lay just beyond the lantern's reach, a hunched shape tangled in the brush. Miguel angled his flashlight, and the beam revealed a shredded ranger jacket half buried beneath dirt and leaves. Miguel's stomach twisted. "Raoul's jacket. I found it just like this," Anna whispered, her voice steady but tight. "No blood, no sign of him. But look at the ground." Miguel crouched, sweeping his light over the forest floor. His gut tightened further. The soil was disturbed, not in a way that suggested a struggle, but as if something had dragged Raoul's jacket to this spot deliberately, only to abandon it. "Claw marks," Anna said, nudging the dirt with the toe of her boot. Sure enough, faint but unmistakable gashes scored the earth, deep and deliberate. They formed a looping, erratic pattern, too wide to be a wolf, too irregular to match the paw prints of any known animal. And there were no boot prints, no tracks at all that could explain how the jacket got here. Just those deep, grooved claw marks radiating outward like a warning. Miguel let out a slow breath. "It's playing with us," he muttered. Anna shot him a sharp look. "You really think it's that thing?" "I don't know." Miguel stood scanning the forest edge. "But whatever it is, it's smart." They stood in uneasy silence for a moment, both listening, both knowing what came next. They had to keep moving, had to find Raoul, or whatever was left of him. But neither of them said it out loud. The forest, it seemed, didn't like words. Words were an intrusion. Anna keyed her radio. "Station, this is Patrol 2. We've got Raoul's jacket. No sign of him yet." A garbled response came through, the static loud and aggressive. "Repeat that? Patrol 2, did you say you found?" The transmission cut out, the static rising into a high-pitched squeal. Anna winced, yanking the radio from her ear. Miguel's fingers hovered over his own, but before he could switch channels, a new sound cut through the forest. A sound that made both rangers freeze. A low, rumbling growl. It rolled through the trees like thunder, distant yet impossibly close, vibrating through the soil beneath their feet. Anna locked eyes with Miguel, her fingers tightening around her rifle. The growl was unlike anything Miguel had ever heard before. Not a wolf, not a bear, but something larger, something ancient. It seemed to echo from every direction at once, as if the very forest was growling. Miguel's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "It's circling," he said under his breath. Anna nodded once, her face pale but composed. "We need to move, now." Miguel turned toward the tree line, scanning the shadows with his flashlight. His beam caught a flicker of movement, something tall, slinking between the trunks. He caught only a glimpse, a hunched shape, limbs too long, eyes glinting a sickly yellow in the dark. And then it was gone, swallowed by the forest. Anna cursed under her breath, like backing toward the lantern. "Did you see it?" Miguel nodded slowly, his throat dry. "Yeah." "What the hell was that?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. There were no words to explain what they had just seen, no language that could capture the wrongness of it. It was as if something from an old nightmare had slipped through the cracks of reality and taken shape in the woods around them. The growl came again, closer this time. Miguel swung his flashlight wildly, trying to find it, but the beam caught only empty air. Anna raised her rifle, her breath coming fast. The forest was closing in around them, and the creature, whatever it was toying with them, herding them deeper into the woods. "We can't stay here," Miguel whispered urgently. "We need to keep moving. Stick to the trail. No noise, no lights." Anna hesitated, her eyes darting toward the direction they had come from. "What if it follows?" Miguel swallowed hard. "It already is." Without waiting for her to answer, he killed the flashlight and nodded toward the far side of the clearing. "We go quiet. Now." Anna gave a curt nod, then extinguished the lantern, plunging them into complete darkness. They slipped into the trees, their breaths shallow, their footsteps careful. The forest seemed to shift around them, branches swaying gently, leaves rustling with the barest hint of movement, as if the trees were whispering secrets to the thing that hunted them. And then, from somewhere deep within the woods, came a sound that stopped Miguel cold, a voice. It was faint but unmistakable, a single word, spoken in a hoarse, broken whisper. Help! Miguel's blood ran cold. He knew that voice. Miguel's breath hitched. The voice, if you could even call it that, was frail, stretched thin like a thread about to snap. It drifted through the trees, barely audible, but it was enough to stop both him and Anna in their tracks. Help! The single word unraveled inside Miguel's mind, twisting with dread. Anna's eyes widened. She had heard it too. Raul? She mouthed, her lips forming the name without sound. Miguel shook his head slowly, an instinctual warning. Something wasn't right. The forest had become too still. No wind, no animals, only that eerie voice hanging in the night air. And yet it didn't sound exactly like Raul. It was off, warped, like a recording played just a little too slow. Miguel had heard Raul's voice dozens of times on the radio, and this was different, wrong in a way he couldn't explain. Then it came again, closer now. Help me. The sound tugged at his mind, luring him forward. A survival instinct flared deep in his gut, screaming, "Don't move, don't follow it." Every hair on his body stood on end, but despite the fear clenching his chest, he found his legs shifting slightly, as if against his own will. The voice wanted them to come closer. Anna grabbed his arm, her grip hard and desperate. "That's not him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It can't be." Miguel nodded, though the words didn't feel reassuring. He knew she was right, but hearing Raul's name spoken in that strangled plea gnawed at the edges of his mind. They couldn't leave without knowing. What if there was a chance, however small, that Raul was still alive, injured and waiting for them? But then, a shadow moved again in the corner of his vision, flickering between the trees. Miguel stopped breathing. It wasn't a normal movement. The thing out there didn't walk. It glided, as if it knew every root and stone in the forest and moved without disturbing a single one. He clenched his jaw to stop his teeth from chattering. It was too close now. Anna tugged his sleeve, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We have to go," she mouthed again. Miguel didn't argue. Whatever was playing games with them, whatever was imitating Raul's voice, wasn't human. They moved as quietly as they could, slipping deeper into the forest. Miguel fought the urge to run, knowing that panic would only get them killed. His breathing was shallow, and each step felt heavier, as if the forest floor was pulling at their feet, trying to slow them down. Then the voice came again, this time from the opposite direction. "Help?" Miguel froze mid-step, his heart hammering against his ribs. How? They had moved away from the clearing. There was no way the sound could have circled around them that fast. Anna swore under her breath. "It's playing with us." The realization hit Miguel hard. The thing knew exactly where they were. It wasn't hunting them in the way a predator would. It was toying with them, like a cat batting at a mouse before the final kill. The forest suddenly felt too large, too alien. Every tree looked the same. Every direction seemed wrong. He could feel Anna's panic building beside him, and the weight of the unknown pressed down on them both like a suffocating blanket. A twig snapped nearby. Miguel whirled around, flashlight instinctively flicking on. The beam cut through the darkness just in time to catch a fleeting glimpse. A pair of yellow eyes, glowing like embers in the black. They hovered at an unnatural height, far taller than any man, watching without fear. And then, they vanished. Miguel's pulse roared in his ears, drowning out everything else. He was about to tell Anna to move when the voice spoke again, impossibly close this time, just beyond the nearest tree. "It's not him." Miguel's heart nearly stopped. It wasn't Raul's voice now, it was his own. An exact, perfect copy of his own voice, whispering from the shadows. "It's not him." The breath left Miguel's lungs in a harsh exhale. His hands shook, fingers gripping the flashlight so tight his knuckles turned white. Anna looked at him, her face pale with confusion and fear. "Did you?" she started to say, but Miguel shook his head violently. "That thing, it was mimicking him." Another twig snapped, closer this time. The air around them seemed to compress, growing thicker, heavier. Miguel's instincts screamed, "Move now!" or die. Go! He hissed, grabbing Anna by the arm. They bolted, no longer caring about stealth. Branches slapped their faces and arm as they tore through the undergrowth, the forest a blur of black and green around them. Behind them, something large gave chase. They could hear it crashing through the underbrush, not running, but bounding like a predator toying with its prey. Miguel's legs burned with every step, his lungs aching for air. Anna was just ahead of him, her rifle clutched in both hands as they sprinted toward a faint glow through the trees, the lantern they'd left behind in the clearing. They burst into the open, panting, hearts racing. But the moment they stopped moving, the sounds behind them ceased. No more footsteps, no more branches snapping. Just the two of them, standing in the clearing, gasping for breath under the weight of the forest's oppressive silence. Miguel spun, flashlight beam sweeping across the treetops. Nothing. No eyes, no shadow, no voice. Just the forest, silent and unmoving, as if it had never stirred at all. Anna doubled over, trying to catch her breath. "What the hell was that?" she whispered between gasps. Miguel didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that something was out there, and it was playing a game they didn't understand. He looked toward the edge of the clearing like where Raoul's shredded jacket still lay half buried beneath the leaves, his gut twisted painfully. "It's not hunting us," he whispered finally. "It's waiting." Anna stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Waiting for what? Before Miguel could respond, a new sound drifted through the trees, a sound far worse than the mimicry, worse than the growls, worse than anything they had heard all night. It was laughter, soft, low, and guttural, as if the forest itself was amused. And somewhere, deep within the tangled shadows, the yellow eyes blinked open once more. Miguel's heart pounded in his chest as the low, guttural laughter coiled through the trees, chilling his blood. It was a sound that didn't belong, not to any animal, not to any human. It rumbled like the forest itself was mocking them, amused by their fear and confusion. Anna raised her rifle, her knuckles bone white, aiming blindly into the darkness. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, though the terror in her voice made it sound more like a plea. Miguel nodded, gripping his flashlight tight as if the thin beam could somehow keep the horror at bay. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He tried to tell himself it was the cold, but he knew better. It was the kind of fear that seeped into your bones, the kind that told you something was terribly, irreversibly wrong. The laughter faded, but the forest remained heavy with tension, like the world was holding its breath. Miguel took a step closer to Anna, his voice low and urgent. "We have to keep moving. Staying here isn't an option." Anna's gaze flicked toward the jacket again, lying abandoned at the edge of the clearing, a cruel reminder that Raoul might not be found alive, or found at all. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the weight of the night pressed down on her, and she gave a grim nod. "Where?" she whispered. "Back to the station? Or deeper in?" Miguel hesitated. Every instinct told him to head back, to get out of this place and never return. But the memory of Raoul's final radio message gnawed at him. "It's not an animal, it's watching me." If Raoul was still out there, if some twisted part of him was still alive, they couldn't just leave. "We go deeper," Miguel said reluctantly, hating himself for it. Anna looked at him like he had just lost his mind. "You want to head toward that thing? If it wanted to kill us, it already would have," Miguel replied grimly. "It's playing with us, trying to pull us in. That means there's still a chance, maybe for Raoul." She didn't look convinced, but she slung the rifle back over her shoulder, jaw tightening in silent acceptance. They both knew this wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was survival. If they didn't push through the fear, they might not live to see daylight. Miguel glanced back at the tree line, scanning for movement. Nothing. The forest had gone still again, watching, waiting. "This way," he whispered, and without another word, they slipped into the deeper part of the woods. The trees grew taller and closer together as they left the clearing behind, their twisted branches blotting out the sliver of moonlight overhead. Every step seemed to take them further from the world they knew, as if the forest had decided to fold itself inward, trapping them within its ancient heart. They moved in silence, every sound amplified in the stillness. The crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant crack of a branch. Every noise set their nerves on edge, each one a potential sign that the thing was still following them, or worse, waiting just ahead. After what felt like an eternity, they came across something strange. An old, weathered path, cutting through the undergrowth, barely visible beneath moss and fallen leaves. It wasn't marked on any map Miguel had seen, and the forest around it looked older, untouched by human hands. "Have you ever seen this before?" Anna whispered, glancing nervously around. Miguel shook his head. "No, and that's not a good sign." The path seemed to beckon them forward, its twisted edges vanishing into the dark, but there was something unnatural about it, as if it wasn't meant to be found. Miguel turned off his flashlight again, the instinct to stay hidden kicking in. "We stick to the path. No noise, no light unless we have to. Got it?" Anna gave a tense nod, and they pressed on, following the faint trail deeper into the woods. As they walked, the forest seemed to change around them. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves. The trees here were different, older, gnarled, with strange carvings etched into their bark, symbols that looked ancient and ominous. Miguel's skin prickled at the sight of them. "What the hell is this?" Anna whispered, brushing her fingers over one of the carvings. "I don't know." Miguel's voice was tight. He didn't want to know. The forest had always felt alive to him in some way, but here it felt aware, as if the ground beneath their feet and the branches above their heads were conscious, watching their every move. And then they saw it. Up ahead, tucked between the ancient trees, stood a crumbling stone circle, half buried in moss. The stones were tall and weathered, their surfaces covered in more of those strange, twisting carvings. In the center of the circle, something gleamed, a small object, barely visible in the dim light. Miguel felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. This was the heart of the forest. He knew it the moment he saw it. Anna approached cautiously, her steps slow and deliberate. "What is that?" she whispered, nodding toward the object in the center. Miguel stepped closer, his pulse hammering in his ears. The object was a crude amulet carved from bone with strange symbols etched along its edges. Miguel's voice trailed off as realization dawned on him. It was a marker, a ward, something meant to keep whatever was out there, in there. Ana's breath hitched beside him. Why would someone leave this here? Miguel knelt, studying the amulet with a sense of growing unease. This wasn't just a random object, it was part of the curse that bound the Dogman to these woods. He could feel it, as if the symbols themselves pulsed with dark energy. Before he could stop her, Anna reached out and picked up the amulet. The moment her fingers closed around it, the forest seemed to exhale. The wind surged through the trees, whipping their branches wildly, as if the woods had suddenly woken from a deep slumber. The ground beneath them rumbled, and somewhere far too close for comfort, the low guttural growl returned. Miguel's blood ran cold. They had made a terrible mistake. "Anna, drop it, now." His voice was sharp, urgent, but before Anna could react, a shadow shifted at the edge of the stone circle, tall, hulking, and unmistakably waiting for them. The Dogman had arrived. It stood just beyond the stones, its yellow eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. It didn't attack. It didn't need to. Miguel knew then that the amulet had been a seal, not a charm, and now they had broken it. The Dogman let out a low, rumbling growl, and for the first time, it smiled. And that was when Miguel understood. They were never supposed to leave. The smile on the creature's twisted face was worse than any growl, a grotesque imitation of a human grin, stretched too wide across a snout filled with jagged teeth. It radiated something more than malice, a sense of triumph, as if it had been waiting centuries for someone to make this exact mistake. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She dropped the bone amulet with a sharp clatter against the stones, but it was too late. Whatever protection or barrier the object had provided was now broken. The Dogman took a slow step forward, slipping just inside the perimeter of the stone circle. Miguel pulled Anna back instinctively, gripping her arm tight. "Don't move." His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. The Dogman crouched low, balancing on two unnaturally long legs, its claws trailing lazily across the dirt like it had all the time in the world. Its yellow eyes locked onto Miguel's, and for a brief, horrifying moment, he felt as though it could see straight through him, into his memories, into his thoughts. Miguel fought the urge to run, knowing deep down that the creature was waiting for it. Running would trigger the hunt, and once it started, there would be no escape. Anna shifted beside him, her breath coming too fast. Miguel squeezed her arm hard, as if to anchor her. "Not yet," he whispered. The dogman tilted its head, as though listening. Then it did something that made Miguel's blood turn to ice. It spoke. "Help me," it whispered. Raul's voice, distorted but unmistakable. The sound slithered through the air like a blade across stone, jagged and deliberate. Anna's entire body stiffened. No, it can't," she stammered, her voice cracking. The dogman's grin widened, revealing more of those awful teeth. It enjoyed their fear. "Raul," Anna whispered, taking an involuntary step forward, as if some part of her still wanted to believe. Miguel yanked her back with more force than he intended. "That's not him! It's using him!" His voice was sharper now, fear overriding caution. The dogman let out a low, rumbling chuckle, the sound vibrating through the air. It took another step closer, crossing fully into the stone circle. Miguel felt his heart hammering so violently he thought it might burst. They were running out of time. Whatever had kept the creature at bay before, whatever curse or seal the forest held in place, was now broken. They had released it. "We need to move." Miguel's voice was low but urgent. Slowly. No sudden movements. Anna nodded, though her eyes were still locked on the creature. Her fingers tightened around the rifle, but Miguel knew it wouldn't do any good. A bullet wouldn't stop something like this. They began to back away, inch by inch, their boots barely stirring the leaves beneath them. Miguel kept his flashlight off. The last thing they needed was to attract more attention. But the dogman followed, its steps unnervingly silent for something so large. It moved with the predatory grace of a wolf, shoulders rolling with each step, claws glinting faintly in the dim light. It was toying with them. "It's not going to let us go," Anna whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Miguel swallowed hard, forcing his mind to stay sharp. He scanned the path ahead, looking for anything, a way out, a distraction, anything. But the forest around them seemed to twist and shift, as if the woods were working with the creature, guiding them deeper into its heart. Then, from the corner of his eye, Miguel spotted something. The broken amulet, lying on the ground where Anna had dropped it. His mind raced. If the amulet had been part of the seal, maybe it still had some power left. Maybe, just maybe, it could buy them time. "Anna, listen to me!" Miguel's voice was steady now, though fear still gnawed at the edges of his mind. "We're going to make a break for it. When I say run, you run. No matter what happens, don't stop. Do you hear me?" Anna's wide eyes locked onto his. "What about you?" Miguel forced a grim smile. "Just trust me." She hesitated for a moment longer, then gave a tight nod. The dogman took another step closer, its claws digging slightly into the earth. It was done waiting. Miguel sucked in a breath, every nerve in his body screaming in protest. "Now!" He shoved Anna hard, sending her stumbling forward toward the path. At the same time, Miguel dove for the amulet, snatching it up from the ground. The dogman reacted instantly. It lunged, claws slashing through the air, a blur of black fur and muscle. Miguel rolled to the side just in time, the creature's claws missing him by inches. He could feel the heat of its breath, the stink of damp fur and rot. "Go, Anna! Don't stop!" Miguel shouted, scrambling to his feet. Anna didn't hesitate. She sprinted down the path, her footsteps fading quickly into the dark. The dogman snarled, whirling toward Miguel. Its yellow eyes gleamed with something close to anger now. The game was over, and it didn't like losing. Miguel's pulse thundered in his ears as he clutched the amulet in his hand. He didn't know if it would work, but it was the only chance he had. The dogman lunged again, faster this time. Miguel raised the amulet high, shouting with every ounce of strength he had left. "Stay back!" For a heartbeat, everything froze. The dogman halted mid-lunge, its yellow eyes narrowing as it stared at the amulet. The symbols carved into the bone seemed to pulse faintly, as if awakened by Miguel's desperate will. For one terrifying moment, the creature hesitated, as if some ancient instinct warned it to be cautious. Miguel didn't wait. He ran. The forest blurred around him as he sprinted down the path, every muscle burning, lungs screaming for air. The dogman's snarl echoed behind him, furious and wild. It was coming, fast. But Miguel didn't stop. He clutched the amulet tight, praying to whatever ancient force still lurked in these woods that it would buy him enough time. Ahead, through the thick trees, he saw it, a sliver of open space, the clearing they had left behind. Anna was there, waiting just beyond the tree line, her rifle raised, eyes wide with fear. "Come on," she shouted, beckoning him forward. Miguel pushed himself harder, every step a battle against exhaustion and fear. The dogman was right behind him, close enough that he could feel the ground tremble beneath its weight. He burst into the clearing, Anna pulling him forward just in time. The dogman skidded to a halt at the edge of the tree line, snarling in frustration. For a moment, it paced back and forth, its yellow eyes locked on Miguel. And then it vanished into the shadows, melting into the forest as if it had never been there at all. Miguel collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The amulet was still clutched in his hand, warm to the touch as if it had absorbed some of the forest's dark power. Anna knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "We made it." Her voice was shaky but relieved. Miguel shook his head, still catching his breath. "Not yet." Because deep in the woods, carried on the night breeze, came another low, mocking chuckle. The dogman wasn't gone, not really, and somehow they both knew it wasn't finished with them yet. Miguel knelt in the clearing, his breath coming in shallow gasps, the weight of the amulet heavy in his hand. The forest around them remained still, but it wasn't the calm of safety. It was the silence of anticipation, a predator's patience. The dogman had receded into the shadows, but it hadn't gone far. It was waiting, circling, as if the forest itself conspired to hide it. Anna crouched beside him, glancing anxiously toward the tree line. "What do we do now?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Miguel knew there was no simple answer. The thing wouldn't stop. Not now. It had tasted their fear, toyed with their hope, and watched them break the seal that had kept it at bay. They had wandered too deep, disturbed something ancient, and it wasn't going to let them leave easily. He stared at the amulet, his mind racing. There was still power in it. He could feel it thrumming faintly, like a heartbeat. But whatever force the amulet carried, it wouldn't last long. They needed more than a charm. They needed a way out. "Miguel," Anna pressed, her voice sharper now. "If we stay here, we're dead. We need to go." Miguel wiped the sweat from his brow, exhaustion weighing on every muscle. She was right. They couldn't stay in the clearing. It was too open, too exposed. The dogman would return, and next time it wouldn't be satisfied with taunting them. He glanced toward the path they had come from. The forest loomed, dark and endless, every branch a potential trap. It wanted them lost. But there was something else gnawing at him, a nagging sense that the way back might be even more dangerous than staying. They had crossed a threshold. They were no longer just trespassers. They were part of the game now. "There's a stream not far from here," Miguel muttered, forcing himself to think through the haze of fear. "If we follow it, it might lead us out. Running water, things like this don't cross it easily." Anna blinked, trying to catch on to his train of thought. "The stream? You're sure?" "No." Miguel gave a grim smile. "But it's better than waiting here to die." She swallowed hard, nodding. "Then we move now, before it catches on." Miguel tucked the amulet into his jacket pocket, praying it would offer some level of protection, however fleeting. "Stick close. We stay quiet, keep moving. No matter what you hear, don't stop." Anna nodded again, her grip tightening on her rifle. Together, they slipped from the clearing, plunging back into the dense undergrowth. The forest swallowed them whole, every step feeling like a descent into something older and darker than the world they knew. The trees closed in tight, their branches twisted into shapes that seemed too deliberate, like hands or claws reaching out to snare them. Miguel led the way, ears straining for the faint sound of running water. The weight of the amulet in his jacket felt heavier with every step, as if the forest's curse was slowly spreading through him. He could sense the dogman nearby, moving, waiting. It didn't need to chase them. It was herding them, steering them deeper into the maze. Anna's breath was quick and shallow behind him, her boots crunching softly on the damp forest floor. She was holding it together, for now. But Miguel knew the signs of panic creeping in. If she snapped, they were both dead. Then, from somewhere behind them, came the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Miguel froze mid-step, raising a hand to signal Ana to stop. They stood perfectly still, hearts thudding painfully in their chests, ears straining to catch every sound. The footsteps were slow, methodical, and worse, they were too close. Miguel turned his head slowly, scanning the shadows. But the forest was a wall of blackness, impenetrable beyond the narrow beams of their flashlights. Then they heard it. The voice again! Ana! The sound slithered through the trees, curling around them like smoke. It was Raoul's voice, perfectly mimicked down to the exact cadence and inflection. Ana stiffened beside him, her eyes wide and unblinking. No, she whispered, shaking her head as if denying the sound would make it go away. Don't listen, Miguel hissed urgently. It's not him, you know that. But the voice came again, soft and pleading. Ana, it's me. I'm hurt. Please help me. Miguel grabbed Ana's arm hard, forcing her to meet his gaze. Stay with me. It's lying. That's not Raoul. She blinked rapidly, her breathing ragged. The voice had hit her like a knife to the gut, stirring memories, regrets, everything that made her vulnerable. Come on, Ana, please. Don't leave me out here. Ana's knees buckled slightly, but Miguel pulled her upright, gripping her tight. Move. Now! Don't listen, just keep moving. Tears welled in Ana's eyes, but she nodded, teeth clenched. Okay. They pushed forward, forcing themselves deeper into the forest, their every step dogged by the sound of those awful footsteps. And that voice, always just a little too close, always just familiar enough to stir doubt. Miguel clenched his jaw, trying to block out the sound, but it was like poison. It seeped into his mind, into the cracks of his fear, tempting him to stop, to look, to believe. After what felt like an eternity, they heard it, the faint trickle of running water. Miguel's chest swelled with hope. The stream, it was close, just a little farther, but the moment the sound reached their ears, the forest reacted. A deep, guttural snarl erupted from the shadows, followed by the thunderous crash of something large, tearing through the undergrowth, heading straight for them. Run! Miguel shouted, and this time they didn't hold back. They sprinted through the forest, branches whipping at their faces, the ground uneven beneath their feet. The sound of pursuit was deafening. The Dogman was no longer toying with them. It wanted them, and it was closing the distance fast. Miguel's lungs burned, but the sight of the stream ahead gave him strength. They were almost there. Ana reached the water first, skidding to a halt on the muddy bank. Miguel, come on. He was right behind her, feet splashing into the shallow stream just as a shadow lunged from the tree line behind him. Miguel twisted at the last second, raising the amulet like a shield. It pulsed with a strange, fleeting energy, just enough to make the Dogman hesitate. The creature snarled, its yellow eyes burning with hatred, but it didn't cross the water. It paced along the opposite bank, lips curled in a snarl, frustrated but patient. Miguel and Ana stood chest-deep in the stream, gasping for breath. The cold water soaked through their clothes, but neither of them cared. They were alive, for now. But as Miguel looked back toward the forest, the Dogman's yellow eyes gleaming in the dark, he knew the truth. It hadn't given up. The stream might have slowed it, but it wouldn't stop it. It was only a matter of time. And somewhere in the back of Miguel's mind, a horrifying realization began to take root. They hadn't escaped. They had only bought themselves a little more time, and time was running out. Miguel stood in the icy stream, the water swirling around his legs as if trying to pull him deeper. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from exhaustion and fear. On the opposite bank, the Dogman prowled just out of reach, pacing along the edge of the water like a caged predator. Its glowing yellow eyes never left them, filled with a dark intelligence that sent chills down Miguel's spine. The thing wasn't frustrated, it was calculating, patient in a way that suggested it had all the time in the world. It would wait until they made a mistake, and mistakes were inevitable. Ana clutched her rifle with both hands, breathing heavily as she stared across the water. It's not going to leave, is it? She whispered, more statement than question. Miguel shook his head, keeping his eyes on the creature. No, he said quietly, not until it finishes what it started. The amulet pulsed faintly in his jacket pocket, a dying ember of protection. It had bought them time, but not salvation. The rules of this game were older than the both of them, etched into the bones of the forest and sealed by the very stones they had disturbed. Now that they had broken the seal, the Dogman wasn't just hunting them. It was reclaiming something. "We can't stay in the water forever," Anna whispered, her voice tinged with helpless frustration. She shivered violently, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin. "It'll wait us out." Miguel knew she was right. The stream wasn't a solution, just a delay. Sooner or later, they would have to move, and the thing would be waiting. He scanned the dark forest on the far bank, searching for a plan, for anything. But the forest seemed endless, thick with shadows that twisted in ways the mind refused to comprehend. The Dogman snarled low, as if sensing Miguel's thoughts. It knew they had nowhere to go. Then, from deep within the woods, a familiar sound drifted through the night air, that awful, mocking laughter. It echoed between the trees like the voice of the forest itself, a reminder that this place belonged to it. Miguel clenched his fists. They had disturbed something ancient. They had tried to survive the night, but survival wasn't enough anymore. If they wanted to live, if they wanted to leave, they had to give the forest what it wanted. Anna must have seen the change in his expression. "What is it?" she asked, anxiety clear in her voice. Miguel took a breath, weighing the terrible thought that had bloomed in his mind. What if the Dogman wasn't just hunting them for sport? What if it wanted something only they could offer? He reached into his jacket and pulled out the amulet, its symbols barely glowing now. The circle, the carvings, the amulet, everything we found back there, it was a seal. Someone trapped it here, locked it in. Anna frowned. "So? What does that mean for us?" Miguel met her gaze, his voice heavy with grim understanding. "It means that the only way it stops hunting us is if we put it back where it belongs." Anna blinked, shaking her head. "You mean?" Miguel nodded slowly. "We have to lure it back to the stone circle, and this time we seal it in ourselves." Anna's face paled. "That thing's faster than us, Miguel. Smarter. It'll tear us apart before we even get close." Miguel gritted his teeth. "We don't have a choice." For a moment, neither of them spoke, the enormity of the task hanging between them like a noose. There was no guarantee they'd make it back to the circle alive. But if they stayed here, the Dogman would find a way to finish them anyway. Finally, Anna gave a shaky nod, her hands tightening around her rifle. "How do we get it to follow us?" Miguel's jaw clenched. He already knew the answer, but he hated it. "We run, and we make sure it chases us the whole way." Anna stared at him like he was insane. "That's your plan? We run and hope it doesn't catch us first?" Miguel forced a grim smile. "Yeah, pretty much." The sound of splashing water made them both turn. The Dogman was pacing more aggressively now. Its snarls deep and guttural, its yellow eyes gleaming with hunger. It could sense their hesitation, knew they were about to move. "We do this together," Miguel whispered urgently. "Stay close. No matter what happens, don't stop running. If we split up, we're dead." Anna gave a small, determined nod. "Okay, on your signal." Miguel gripped the amulet in one hand, feeling the last remnants of its power thrumming weakly. He knew it wouldn't last much longer, but it might be enough to keep them ahead of the beast, if only by a few precious seconds. He took a breath, locking eyes with Anna. "Go. Now." They exploded out of the stream, water spraying behind them as they sprinted into the forest. The Dogman roared, a furious, bone-rattling sound, and launched after them with terrifying speed. The forest blurred as Miguel and Anna tore through the undergrowth, branches slashing at their arms and faces. The Dogman's footsteps thundered behind them, closing the distance fast. It wasn't running flat out, not yet. It was playing with them again, savoring the chase. "This way," Miguel shouted, veering left toward the path that led back to the stone circle. Anna was right behind him, her breath ragged but steady. They couldn't afford to slow down, not for a second. The amulet burned hot in Miguel's hand, its fading energy flickering like a dying flame. He prayed it would hold just a little longer. The sound of the Dogman's snarls grew louder, so close now that Miguel could feel its hot breath on the back of his neck. It was toying with them, lunging and snapping, forcing them to waste energy dodging. Every second counted. And then The stone circle appeared ahead, rising like a ghost from the shadows. "Almost there!" Miguel shouted, adrenaline surging through his veins. They crashed into the clearing just as the dogman leapt forward, claws raking the air inches from Anna's back. Miguel whirled, raising the amulet high. It flared with one last burst of light, forcing the creature to recoil with a snarl. "Get inside the circle," Miguel yelled. Anna scrambled over the stones, and Miguel followed, heart pounding as he threw the amulet into the center of the circle. The dogman lunged again, but the moment it crossed the threshold, the symbols on the stones lit up, blazing with ancient power. The creature howled, its body seizing midair as the curse reawakened, dragging it back into the seal. Its claws scraped uselessly against the stones, its yellow eyes wide with rage and fear. The ground trembled, and a low, mournful howl echoed through the forest as the dogman was pulled back into the darkness from which it came, bound once more to the heart of the woods. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the forest fell silent. Miguel collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, his limbs trembling from exhaustion. It was over. Anna stood beside him, her hands shaking, but her expression one of disbelief. They were alive. "We did it," she whispered, almost as if she couldn't believe it. Miguel let out a shaky breath, nodding. "Yeah, for now." Because even as the forest settled, the faint echo of the dogman's howl lingered in the air. A grim reminder. The seal was temporary. The curse would sleep, but only for a time. And the forest? It never forgot. Miguel and Anna stared into the darkness, knowing that one day it would wake again. And when it did, someone else would have to pay the price.